Hello, hello.
Hello, welcome everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes. I need to make a few people co-hosts here. Getting a little feedback.
I hear Patrick a bit low. Hi, I don't know if you hear me well.
Hi, Isabel. Kai. Yep. Okay.
Unmuted, yes.
Can you?
Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. And welcome to Material Reuse in the City, a rapid-fire roundtable discussion. This event is part of the MDES 22 Research Creation Residency here at ForceSpace, running from May 2nd to May 12th, 2022. We are coming to you live from Concordia's ForceSpace, located on unceded indigenous lands in Chichage, Montreal. At ForceSpace, we work to connect people to the initiatives, research projects, and dialogues happening across Concordia University. So we are excited to welcome Patrick Pierce along with his special guests for this event. I'll hand it over to Patrick to get us situated, but before I do so, I'll remind you that we are running this as a meeting, so we welcome your comments and questions with a raised hand or via the chat. And we are live streaming on YouTube, so I'll be posting the link to that live stream in the chat. It is now my pleasure to pass it over to you, Patrick. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. So I would just like to dovetail on Chanelle's mention of unceded territory and Native peoples who have preceded us. There's a long history of reuse, and in fact, there's been an interesting study done of Native nations in Russia territory, just to take a different perspective on Russia these days. And what's interesting is in their language, there is no word for waste, and everything is just considered part of their life in that sense. So it's just something interesting to think about different perspectives on what is waste, and as this is some of the basis for what we're talking about in terms of reuse. So I just wanted to briefly introduce our panelists. We have from Concordia, Faisal Shenib, who has been really looking into data mining, big data, and remote sensor technology, as well as machine learning in terms of waste management and circular activities at local scales. So he's been, for those at Concordia, they may have seen the smart waste bins that are being used in some areas of the campus. And he is also working on certain aspects that relate to reuse. So he's going to tell us about those. We have in Barcelona, is that where you are today, Isabel? Yes. Who also sometimes works in Berlin. So she's a researcher at Technik University in Berlin, researcher in the circular economy and recycling technologies, and a professor and researcher at El Sava School of Engineering and Design in Barcelona. Isabel has been looking into centers for urban remanufacturing and reuse as an interesting category, which she's going to tell us about. And we have in Atlanta, Shannon Goodman, who's an architect and executive director of the Lifestyle Building Center in Atlanta, which is really a model center for its kind and has been informing and some of the activities in this regard in Montreal. Some of you may know that there is a new initiative called Matériaux sans frontières, or Materials Without Boundaries. And it's a new center for reuse that's scheduled to open this fall, I believe. And Shannon and the Life Cycle Building Center has been advising Kaladin, the executive director of this center in Montreal. So she can tell us about that, because I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on there. So I'll hand it over to whoever wants to start. Maybe Faisal. I just want to make sure that I wanted you to be able to just briefly introduce some of the things that you've been involved with. And while you're chatting, I'll see if I can get the co-host thing going here to allow you to share a screen.
Sure, yeah, either way, it's fine. I mean, I can talk. So, yeah, my name is Faisal. I have been working at Concordia University since I was a student, like around 12 years ago here, doing a master's in civil engineering. And I got really passionate about sustainability at the time, and, you know, out of my own personal concern and learning about what was going on. And Concordia University had really cool initiatives that were very inclusive and non-hierarchical and accessible. And I just got sucked into that world. And I ended up getting this job that I still have today, working as, you know, a professional, helping the university to be more sustainable. One of our targets is waste management, as many institutions and, you know, municipalities, cities have these goals of reducing waste. We caught wind of the zero waste movement that was kind of growing at the time. And we were some like innovators in compost technology, like applying it at the local scale. We bought like a composter that was for like agricultural purposes, and brought it to the Loyola campus and started composting. And we got students involved in the research, because, you know, food waste is a big component of, you know, municipal waste. Eventually, I connected with some individuals. One of them is here today, Ariane Weeks, who's sitting there, and Anna Timbotis, who created this Center for Creative Reuse project in collaboration with us at Facilities Management, basically to have a space to collect materials kind of similar to you see in other areas that are generated on campus, and to try to give it a chance to turn into something else. So we call it a creative reuse center, in the sense that it's just an alternative way of looking at the materials. It doesn't have to be for a creative purpose. Anyway, they can speak much more to the vision and concept behind it, but it's very accessible, it's free, there's no cost associated with it. And we track everything that comes in and out as best as we can using a simple scale and, you know, a WordPress website, and we key in, you know, what's coming in, and everyone has to check everything in and check everything out. And so we're collecting some data on reuse, which is really interesting potentially to look into. As somebody who's an engineer and interested in the trends of kind of data-driven technologies, I thought, hey, maybe we can do something more with this data one day. So that's where one of my research proposals came from. I eventually decided to go back to school to study circular economy and data-driven technologies. And the way it's being applied currently, but also looking at how we can use it in different ways that are more engaging towards community, more empowering to communities, that generate open data that people can use for the better of everyone, rather than just these companies kind of auditing themselves, or, you know, trying to do a little better with sorting or whatever is going on kind of more behind the scenes. So I think Concordia University is a really interesting place to try that, because we have a particular kind of atmosphere and community that's very interested in this stuff. And so I want to research these questions around that stuff, like, how does this technology currently work? What can we do? How effective could it be? I am not particularly technocratic, even though I'm studying this stuff. I believe community is very important, and we need bottom-up approaches as much as top-down. So that's essentially what my research is on. It's multidisciplinary. I'm in the INDIE program, so I'm an engineer by training, but I look at questions around policy, society, and marketing as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Shannon, you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
I'd love to. So just to confirm, are we able to share our screen? Should I try?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see.
Okay, I'll try.
Let's see.
Did it work?
Yeah, you got it. Okay, great.
Okay. So I wanted to just share a quick story. My background actually, or my path to reuse, started in architecture. And I wanted to just highlight kind of my journey to where I am today. And then I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing now. So basically, this is a shot of where I used to work, a firm called Perkins & Will here in Atlanta. And this large sort of concrete structure that you see was a building that was transformed by this company. And basically, I was involved in trying to figure out how could we reuse as many materials as possible in this building. It was a 50,000 square foot space. And so lots of talking about data, Faisal, lots of tracking of information, and then just getting that information out to the community. So I would definitely like to talk with you more and learn more about what you're doing, because this is key. Being able to make increase accessibility to this information is going to help scale up reuse. There's a physical aspect. This was actually before Lifecycle Building Center existed. So we had an underground parking deck that we stored all the materials in while we were finding all the homes for them, and lots of data tracking on each of the organizations we donated to. And just a couple of examples. We had schools. This is a church we gave ceiling tile to. We had another nonprofit called South Face Institute, a great sustainability organization. We were able to give cabinets and other materials to. And you can see kind of some metrics. We tracked a lot of metrics in terms of the pounds of material and the value of those materials. Beautiful workstations came out of the space. Carpet tile went to Habitat for Humanity, almost over $70,000 worth of carpet tile. Lots and lots of cabinets we were able to donate. But what's really awesome is what these nonprofits do with these materials, how it enables them to enact their mission and do more good work in the community. So Habitat was able to have the proceeds from all these material sales through their restores fund the construction of a new home. And this is kind of a summary of some of the projects. These are all the different nonprofits that we donated to. And that's what led to my journey with LBC. I have this one final little story I've got to share though. We worked with our demolition contractor and salvaged this beautiful solid cherry wood trim. And the organization I worked with, Perkins & Will, transformed that into their conference room tables. So I never stop being inspired by what reuse can do in terms of community impact, but also how beautiful it can be. And I'll share some stories. This is a little sneak peek for later in terms of our facility down here in Atlanta.
That's inspiring, Chanel. Shannon, rather. Sorry, we have a Chanel here. Chanelise. It's amazing what you can do from upcycling. I think a lot of people have a certain perception of it, and it's just incredible, the possibilities. I'll hand it over to Isabel to tell us a bit about her work.
Sure. Hi, I'm very happy to join you guys from the other side of the pond. It's really exciting to see so many interesting things going down the same path that I'm working with. So I'm an industrial designer. And when I did my studies in Chile originally, I was a little bit like Faisal, very enthusiastic about sustainability. We actually tried to start a reuse market with secondary materials at the school where I was doing it, of course, with no budget and just enthusiasm. So it didn't get far, but that's kind of marked my way forward. So I did a master's and PhD in sustainable design, and my research topic has been resource recovery from waste. It's like my main research. I'll tell you a little bit more very briefly about it later on when we talk about the projects. And then what I've been looking at as work after my PhD has been this urban resource centers that are very much up and coming. And you guys are perfect examples of it. And basically it's, I would say, a very pregnant idea. There's a lot of institutions or organizations that are doing it, and there's everybody's encountering the same difficulties, which is, you know, how do we track what is being done? You know, how does it come in? How does it go out? And how much time can we dedicate to collecting the data, to tracking, and to be able to show it, and so on. So that's what I've been looking into in a couple of research projects. And yeah, I'm basically the trash nerd as well. I would say that's a good summary, but I guess we're in good company.
Absolutely. Just briefly about myself, I'm a designer and consultant. I've been doing my Master of Design here at Concordia, working on upcycling with the idea of scaling up upcycling. So just a few images of some of my work in the workshops here. where I've been collaborating with a local manufacturer of lighting components and making some of these projects. These are the legs of a table project made from cylinders of a lighting fixture and plasma operations. So sometimes more on the craft end, and sometimes you can see there's more of an industrial side to it. For those that have had the chance, there's an exhibition. It's the last day, unfortunately, here at the Force Space. So just to get an idea of what you can do again with upcycling and reuse. So I wanted to jump into this topic and really ask people, our panelists, for what they see as the role of reuse in the circular economy and the relative attention that it's been getting, reuse, repurposing, upcycling these days. It seems to me, I did a little search, and that if you look globally, the term upcycling has been trending steadily upwards in terms of Google search terms since about 2008, 2009. So that's very inspiring to see that there's growing sort of buzz, but I'm just wanting to get your sense about this. I'm going to go back to you, Fizal. Do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I automatically think of reuse when I think of the circular economy, actually. So I don't know about other people, but obviously circular economy is a fairly comprehensive term that involves, keeping flows like as local as possible and minimizing environmental impacts. And you can think in terms of energy, but I think of materials right away. I just think of the immense amount of energy that goes into materials. I think there's more and more conversations happening about that whole hidden world, right? Like, I think a lot of times when we talk about climate and, energy emissions, related emissions, we think of fuel for vehicles and buildings and stuff, but we're not always talking about the materials that we consume and what a huge proportion a lot of research is showing it comprises in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And that if we don't start figuring that out at the same time as we're talking about this other stuff, we might be in big trouble. So when I look at, the figures in terms of how we're doing, just in terms of, even waste diversion, we're not even doing well in, and that's such a complex issue because there's so much materials, right? Like, we always think we need to have good recycling because we can't reuse everything, but clearly we need to reuse more as well. Like, we all understand that adds so much more value and is so much better for the environment as well. So I'm inspired that there's so much kind of zeitgeist around upcycling and reuse, and just so many initiatives happening that I can't keep track of them. Even here in Montreal, I wasn't even aware of this new center coming up. So That's awesome. I obviously want to talk to everybody here way more than I think we're going to be able to in this session. So thank you, Patrick, for organizing this. I'm really grateful. This is amazing.
For sure, yeah. We are privileged participants in this, but I get my sense, like, I often have to explain what upcycling is to people. And Shannon, I don't know if you get this in Atlanta, upcycling and reuse, like, how do you feel that there's a greater and increasing awareness of this? Is it still like a slow and a very, like, we're still at sort of early awareness building in this regard?
So what I will say is that it does vary by region here in the United States. The Southeast, where LBC is located, is a little behind the ball. And honestly, the way I see it, the ideas and the excitement around the possibilities is definitely there. Where I see things lacking is the level of investment that's needed in scaling up the infrastructure, the amount of labor, logistics, physical space, all of those tangible things that have to be developed, the marketplace itself. And that's where, Faisal, I'm really interested to, learn more about what you're doing, because I'm starting to have more and more conversations with folks who are trying to tackle the technology side of reuse. And, there's the sort of user-facing aspect of that, but then there's also, how do you make those systems workable for a real-world environment like ours, when you're talking about inflows of materials that are constantly unpredictable, right? Huge variations in parameters of what you have to deal with. There's the physical challenges that come with that, but there's also how do you design, data-driven systems that can be so nimble and flexible and you make the process fast. We've worked with tools that have allowed us to track inventory and display that online, but you have to make sure that those tools are so facile that they can be adjusted quickly and easily. And that flow of information into your system and back out into the community is key. The other thing that I will say that I'm going to touch on later when we're sort of talking about, project focus is storytelling. Storytelling is key to changing behavior. And what I see is that's the disconnect. The idea of reuse is there and people are passionate and excited. It's how do you make it easy and how do you make it feasible for more people to engage? And what I find is that when people shift their thinking about the materials and stop seeing them as waste. So totally appreciate the comment about the trash nerd, but I will tell you, I am on a mission to get people to stop using the word waste when they talk about the materials and resources that we are collecting. So I'll stop there.
That's amazing. Isabel, now I know everyone knows sort of Europe has a bit of a jump on North America in this regard. However, in the European Waste Initiative, it seems that reuse is still kind of a small component. And as some of your research has demonstrated, waste management is still the dominant model rather than reuse and upcycling and so on. So yeah. What's your perspective? Like, do you feel there's been a shift in the last, I don't know, year or two or three? Is there?
I think there's definitely been a shift. There is much more initiatives that are focusing on the reuse and repair and remanufacturing side of things. However, it is, as Shannon was saying, very time and resource intensive and very difficult to manage because of the variety, of elements that come your way. So it's very difficult to streamline. And the other thing that I think reuse is almost in human nature. We've always had it, until we started having this industrial production that is pushing planned obsolescence. Then we kind of shift away to a more disposable culture. And then we're realizing that was a very bad move. And we need to kind of backtrack to what we used to do all the time. Like we used to mend, we used to buy, we used to make do with what we had. So I think reuse has always been with us, and a lot of things like secondhand clothes, secondhand cars, it's always been there, and it still is. So I think the problem is that because reuse has never been tracked as part of waste management, because it's effectively not, it's waste prevention, then it's a use cycle, let's say, that goes invisible in all statistics. And because it's not waste, we don't include it in the waste statistics, but we're basically having a much bigger material use than we account for, because we have the production and then we have the outputs of the waste, but then there's all the things that are reused that we're still, using, and that effective material use is much higher than we see. So I think it's always been present, but it's always been invisible. And I think more people are now making it visible and giving it importance. And in the European Union, the Waste Directive has it as actually waste prevention and reuse the highest options, with the difference that, like, by book definition of the normative, reuse is only to the same use it used to have. So if waste management takes clothing and puts it in secondhand shops, that would be reused. But waste prevention, which is, this is something that somebody's going to toss and I'm going to make something else out of it, that is not accounted for ever. So I think there is this definition problem that, okay, we are talking about reuse, but we're effectively talking about prevention. But because we're reusing the materials for a different purpose, then I think that I always need to clarify what we're talking about. And the same with upcycling or downcycling, and this sort of, the idea of cascading, there's an inherent value definition in there, that this has more value or less value than something else. And those are always a bit subjective. So I think there is still a long way so that we know that we're talking the same language, let's say.
And I think a lot of what comes to mind when we talk about reuse is consumer waste, whereas there's a huge amount of industry waste, not to mention construction and demolition waste, which are very specific reuse potential scenarios. So in thinking about all of these areas, we touched on some of the challenges. I just wanted to get either further ideas on those challenges, but also the opportunities that you're seeing in terms of reuse of cities, and maybe some of the more exciting projects you're noticing. And we're going to talk afterwards about specific projects that you guys are each going to present, but other things that are going on. Now, just to take one example, in Montreal, we have we've recently launched a new bridge in replacement of the one that was built in 1958, not that old, but it had some structural problems. But one of the upshots is the old Champlain Bridge is being decommissioned, and all of the steel parts are being, or most of them are being offered for a reuse, a call for tendering, a call for projects, a contest, if you would, for infrastructure and arts and creative reuse projects. So that's a kind of exciting project that I find is interesting, and it has a very wide scale impact. So other projects that come to mind in terms of opportunities that cities can seize to make reuse exciting that you are seeing, Faisal?
Yeah, that's a great point. Is there are kind of these kind of showcase examples that we're hearing about that are very nice examples and very effective. I think there was like the SDM decommissioning the subway trains, the metro trains as well. Like I think you could take parts of those at some point. And then really the reason they work is because they're very high profile, right? Like they have an audience, they have the marketing budget, and probably a budget as well to spend time or coordinating the logistics of all that. So I mean, Isabel's talking about the time intensity, like Shannon talked about the data, like the lack of connecting the information of availability with the people who might need it. That is, to me, the fundamental challenge, I think, of this project is there is so much stuff out there. There's so many actors out there, and we're not valuing this stuff in the right way to give it a chance to be shared. And we don't have like the marketplace, right? Like this humongous marketplace. We have these informal marketplaces, and it requires your time and energy to put it out there. So really the question is, how do we make that easier? Frankly, I don't have like an amazing example to share just off the top of my head, but I did want to make that point, and that's really what we're trying to test out at Concordia. Is we have our center, we have it accessible to people. It works. Like we have people coming, and we've received like some good input and good participation. We actually track the value of how much is diverted. I think that's important, like Shannon does with her institution. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars saved to the community from a couple of years of activity. We asked them to estimate how much they would have spent instead of getting this material. So these kind of accounting structures can really help, I think, make the case to like institutions and governments that they need to provide this service. Like we have to start thinking of it as a service that we invest in, just like we do with other things. We put money into it so that we're not putting money into the wrong places like the landfill, so that the community can get the value out of it, rather than like thinking of it as a project for individuals or individual organizations to undertake.
I noticed in your literature review that there's all kinds of possibilities from big data, from tracking, building information management type data, and life cycle analysis data. The quantity of data and the possibilities of AI and machine learning are certainly creating new opportunities for communicating the possibilities of reuse, and also making it easier to say, oh, in this building that we're tearing down, we know that there's X, Y, Z materials that could be possibly circuited, if you would, towards other projects, right? In that sense, there's amazing possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have yet to really tap into that. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if anybody else is hearing that, but Isabel, you had your hand up. I think you want to.
Yeah, I'm also getting the feedback, and I just had to pitch in. I totally agree with Pascal. The thing is, and one of the things, the value recovery or the value saving, there's a big question here, and it's a little bit, we have the market, like we have a lot of stuff to sell secondhand, but not enough people to buy secondhand. And that's the question is basically, why do all the malls cater for new things rather than secondhand shops? So one of the projects that comes to mind is in Sweden. They had a secondhand mall, and they set it up as a mall, and it was only secondhand stuff. And the same happens in Berlin, in the Nochmal. It's literally called Nochmal, as in like one more time, but with a play on words to the mall. And we basically need that the secondhand stores are not like outside of the city in like shabby streets. We needed high streets, the main mall, right next to the H&M, the Zara or whatnot, you know, like, and I think IKEA, for example, has taken a little bit of that in, and they actively move the secondhand market for their own products, you know, like, so they realize that if we're going to seriously go circular, we need to go into secondhand. And that's the way. I think that push into reminding us that the value is there, but the value that we want the people that use secondhand or recovered materials to gain is the value we're taking away from the market today. So we're direct competition. And I think the thing is, rather than compete, let's work together. So that they design things that are new, but that are more optimized, and there are less stuff that are cut-offs left over that we would have to break our heads to figure out, right? So it's a little bit of a synergetic collaboration that manufacturing industry is maybe starting to open their eyes to, but are being very slow to act upon. And that's why we have all these kind of grassroots initiatives and a lot of these, as you say, institutions that put it up as a service. Another project that I remember, we did a visit to Copenhagen in Denmark, where the library system, the Danish library system, realized that they have to offer more services than just a library in this digital era. So the direct service was Fab Labs. They're all municipal open Fab Labs for makers, and also, you know, enabling reuse materials. And that's also something that's been done in Gothenburg with these fixotekets that I'll briefly talk later. So it's that service, bringing back to the community, is moving us away from the market economy, or like.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond the circular economic impact, the sustainability, you have all of the social benefits that reuse can bring, and bringing communities together. And I was noticing, Shannon, in some of the life cycle building centers activities, you have workshops where you're training people how to do upcycling and so on. I mean, these kind of things are immensely inspiring. Maybe you want to talk a bit about that or other opportunities.
You literally read my mind. That was exactly what I was going to talk about. So yeah, what I'm the most excited about is helping people understand the tremendous social and community benefits of reuse. But I have to say, before I get into that, Isabel, the secondhand mall idea is awesome. I love that. So that's gonna percolate in the back of my mind. So I'll share some examples later, but we do have a program where we donate free materials to nonprofits, churches, schools, etc. And it's been profound. There's a particular area of that where I see a lot of potential, and that is specifically related to affordable housing. There's a lot of need for affordable housing, particularly in Atlanta. And there are a lot of nonprofit organizations there's a lot of underserved, underinvested communities that we have, a lot of which are near where we're located in Southwest Atlanta. And there are, neighborhoods with half or more of the homes unoccupied, boarded up. And so a lot of nonprofits are purchasing those homes and redeveloping them, renovating them to become affordable units. and we're donating materials. But the key, and I think Faisal and Patrick, you both talked about this, is scale. So we've done this, a couple houses at a time, but we want to start working with nonprofits where we're doing 20, 30, 40 units at a time. And this is the beginning of how we show, do case study examples and show replicability. And those can reap benefits for other communities in the future.
That's amazing. So time is flying. I'd like you all to present a little project, but we have about 3, maximum 4 minutes each. Keeping the order here, Faisal, I'll let you jump in and share your screen if you want to talk about something that you're working on as it relates to reuse.
Yeah, sure. I'll make it real zippy. All right, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
All right, I'll just go into slideshow. Okay, so the project name that we're using right now at Concordia is Digitizing Waste, just to give it a whole umbrella. And there's a few projects that we're going to try to do. I'm not going to talk about the background in terms of the problems, because we're all very well of the problems, including insufficient data and the ease of which we send things to landfill. It is the cheapest way to handle materials, usually. And there's a lot of research opportunities. So that's kind of why I look to become a researcher, because I really want to quantify, like Shannon was talking about, these opportunities to see if we can make the case to scale. And kind of try to integrate some best practices from marketing as well, which I think is really interesting. I realize there's this whole world that we use, that product developers use when they're creating new products to market more effectively new products. We should be using these kinds of techniques for the secondhand world as well, right? Like, we shouldn't leave all those goodies to these companies who are selling new things. So I think there's catching up to do. And that's the same idea of the inspiration for data-driven approaches, right? Like, when we think of Amazon, and I'll talk a little bit about that, we think of, recommender systems. And so that's one project I'm going to talk about. But overall, here's the vision of what I would like to try to create at Concordia. I think this is what's going to happen in the future. So this is a super kind of utopian, futuristic way of seeing material flows, but basically where we understand what's happening with materials in as many places as we can, all of these kind of contexts, in order to be able to maximize their potential. So it's not just when you're throwing things away in a smart bin, it's not just at the reuse center, it's where things are going, it's in the dumpster, right? Like, dumpster diving happens, but that's because there's valuable things in there, right? So we should have a place for things to pause before they go in the dumpster, for people to be able to get that stuff before they have to put themselves in harm's way, potentially, to get that stuff as well. Anyway, so even with food, right? I think the surplus food market could have some of this technology applied. So I'm going to be working with this company, Evo Eco, to see if we can embed cameras that will detect what people are throwing away as effectively as possible. It's a big challenge because there's a lot of diversity, even in the consumer packaging market of materials. So Shannon was talking about the variety of materials they deal with. Even just packaging waste is quite diverse, but you'll see trends in an area, in a local area, hopefully will develop, and you'll train the model to become better at detecting those particular items there. And users will be able to give feedback to correct the mistakes that the algorithm is making. And so hopefully you'll get better and better data the more data you share. That's the general idea, when it comes to machine learning, is you need a lot of data to do it right. And that's why it starts slow, but eventually, if you get enough people participating, you get more effectiveness. So you can have a mobile app version, more accessible, right? Rather than just at these kind of contexts of waste bins, you have it with you. You can ask, what do I do with this? And then maybe you don't just use it for a consumer packaging product, but also some et cetera stuff, like reusable stuff, right? And maybe you create the system of people using this tool who are interested in each other's materials, rather than just learning how to sort these materials better. So very abstract, we'll have to come up with some use case studies of where this kind of stuff could actually be effective, but that's what we're going to try to do at Concordia. I talked about food waste. Again, we throw way too much food waste away, and Concordia, there's such a high density. There's definitely an opportunity to do better in terms of identifying those opportunities and connecting with even people who can help distribute it better. So that's another engagement opportunity with data-driven tech. So when we talk about recommender systems at Amazon, you get just these amazing recommendations, right? And when you're on your social media feeds, it's mind-boggling how much they know you. So if we're doing this for new products that are more harmful for the environment to consume, we should be trying to do this with the secondhand market as well. So that's kind of the thesis. And these algorithms, they're not actually that complicated, but they need a lot of data. So at our reuse center, for example, this is kind of like a little photo glimpse inside there. We do have a lot of diversity materials, mostly small items, but Aryan will attest to the fact that he does go into some of the construction and renovation waste like material stuff. He does harvest like wood. We have made a board table, just like Shannon, a conference table, like very similar parallels of what's happening there. So we'll see that kind of crosstalk between the kind of like consumer packaging, consumer goods world and the construction materials world. But yeah, we track it. We've diverted like $270,000 worth of material so far, and lots of tons of waste. But let's say, like as a thought experiment, we have a lot of data on what kinds of people are throwing things away, and of course you have to be careful about personal data and anonymizing data. That's going to be a challenge as well. But then maybe you start to uncover patterns of what types of people are using what kinds of materials, right? So if you have membership data, like, I don't know, are they a student? What kind of student are they for Concordia, right? The relevant information, not kind of like the stuff that's going to create biases, but like just like things that kind of will help create a useful association with materials and recommendations. And then maybe they get a push recommendation saying, hey, there's a canvas available here. You're an art student, you should come by. So that's the thesis. That's what we're going to try to do at Concordia. It's just a thought experiment so far, but we're gonna try it out.
That sounds amazing, and I want to get Aryan rather to chat in our first comments in a bit. But Aryan, who is responsible for the Concordia Center for Creative Reuse. So I'll get the camera on you in a minute, Aryan. But I was thinking, Shannon, all of what Faisal has been talking about could be really interesting things that could apply. I don't know what you think, how applicable they are to the life cycle building center.
I think it's super exciting. I've sort of like had this dream for a long time of integrating technology to a point where you walk into a reuse center like ours and you can scan, a code and learn about the history of materials that are there. And, that material information can be easily accessed online. And how do you find ways of incentivizing the users of the material to proactively share their stories themselves about what they do with it? Because that's what gets so many more people willing to donate the materials, more people to use materials, willing to volunteer, support the system. So super excited about it. I love it. Do you want me to also share a little bit, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. Let me share my screen.
Sorry, can I do a quick question before I forget?
Yeah.
You said that you had accounted for the value that you're recirculating. What value do you account for? The material as of new, or their secondhand market value?
Yeah, so we ask the participants, the members who take the materials out, to estimate what they would have spent to buy it new. So we only account once it's used, and then it's an estimate from the user. So whether it's accurate or not, I mean, it's as dependent on their ability to estimate what they would have spent, which is, not a terrible thing. I mean, hopefully they're not overestimating too much. I think there'd be validation that would need to be done eventually.
You got to start somewhere, right? All right, let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So this is the building we fell in love with down in Southwest Atlanta back in 2011, 70,000 square feet, over 100 years old. And I'm just going to kind of run you through, if I can get this to move. There we go. So just a few examples of common materials that we deal with every day. So cabinets, vintage appliances, even appliances that are still pretty new. Doors, windows, plumbing fixtures, lumber, lighting, you name it, right? Things that you're going to see in most reuse centers. Like I mentioned before, we've tried a couple of tools to get information about materials to make it more accessible. This is one attempt that we actually did during COVID, but again, we kept coming across issues with the amount of time that it takes to get all this information up onto the online platform. So speeding up that process and making it, so seamless that, it's not burdensome. That's the key. I think, Patrick, you mentioned the workshops. We get super excited about taking these materials and helping people build skills. And those skills, for making things can be converted into, projects in their own home. We also do some classes around energy efficiency, home performance. And we've also started converting some of that online as well. I talked about the nonprofit program and just wanted to share a couple of examples. This is a really cool greenhouse project on a community farm that services refugee families up in Clarkston. And, they were able to get, the joist that you see in the roof structure of that greenhouse came from a TV film set. And remember that because I'm going to bring that up again. Doors, paneling materials, lots of cool stuff went into this. And they're able to transfer agricultural knowledge from older generations to younger generations. It's really cool. Lots of other projects like building garden boxes for senior residents in communities near LBC. Another urban farm project. We were able to deconstruct all of this siding material from a couple of historic homes in Atlanta. We were able to give them, 2x4s to build all their seedling trays, fixtures to rinse off produce. I mentioned the Affordable Housing Initiative. These are a couple of projects that we worked on. And, basically it's again, like demystifying that reuse doesn't have to be shabby or, not look good. So this is one of the kitchens where we were able to donate cabinets. We also donated, all the plumbing fixtures, doors, things like that. And again, this was 2 houses. We've done this on some other projects, but we want to do this on, a larger number of projects. Lots of exciting things with tiny homes. So this is one with, doors, windows, plumbing fixtures, tile, etc. So that's really exciting. And as you can imagine, a lot of folks get excited that are into those kind of movements. Workforce development is a big focus for LBC. And that is going to be growing as well. So I'm excited about that. And this kind of gives you a little snapshot. We're approaching about 10 million pounds we've been able to divert from landfills. But that last number, those last couple of numbers that talk about the nonprofit program and the community savings, that's really key. And that's a huge motivator. I like to tell people a lot that folks that engage with LBC, a lot of them don't necessarily, if they're looking for materials, it's not necessarily because they're trying to be green, it's because they're trying to save money. And that's fine. They don't even have to believe in climate change. They're still supporting environmental sustainability by engaging. I did want to make a plug. I think, Patrick, you were talking about the reuse organization in Montreal. I have a feeling that the national organization Build Reuse may also be playing a role in that. So that's a great resource to look at the national organization. And we've been talking about data and scaling up investment. And so we've been starting through Build Reuse. And I'd love anybody that's in this participation on this presentation as well as listening. We'd love your support because we're starting a national study of the reuse industry here. And I feel like this is one of the most powerful things we can do because we don't understand our collective economic, social, and environmental impact. So, economic impact is huge. How many jobs are we creating? How much money are we saving people in the community across the US? How much embodied carbon is our industry saving across the country? We're not tracking the value, the impact value of all these materials that we're wasting. And, when you look at carbon, it's not the easiest thing to figure out, like there's all these nuances of how do you decide how much carbon depending on each specific item. And last but not least, I did want to share this really cool story. We have an amazing example of reuse in Atlanta called the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design on Georgia Tech's campus. And I go back and mention again those floor joists that you saw in the roof of that greenhouse. This is an example of where those came from. If you see the structure of this TV film set, and we were able to recover a lot of different materials for the Candida project, but one of the most exciting ones were the 2x4s that were built for the platform under the TV set. Those were, I mentioned the workforce development of the Georgia Works placements, worked with the general contractor and converted those reclaimed 2x4s into these beautiful nail laminated timber decking panels in the Candida project. Amazing project, would love to tell you more. Another couple of examples, even the leftover 2x4 material was turned into the monumental stairs and space. Lots of reclaimed wood from buildings on Tech's campus, including these, all of the slate tile came from the roof of a building at Tech that was from the late 1800s. So lots of cool stories. Thanks for letting me share that.
Super inspiring, Shannon. So many questions and exclamations that I would like to talk about, but I'll hand it over to Isabel maybe for a quick project that she wants to share, and then we'll open the field up to questions and comments.
Yeah, I'm super happy to see all this. It's so much information. We definitely have to do another call, just us to nerd out and share tips and tricks. So I think
by the way, if people have resources, Shannon, you mentioned organizations and links, you could already add those to the chat, and people could click on them and bookmark them while we're talking. Sorry, go ahead, Isabel.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was also going to comment that I put a couple of links in the chat already, and you're seeing my screen, right?
Yep.
Super. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects, but also I just wanted to, this PDF has links in it where you can download a lot of the information that I'm talking about. So I'm going to share this with Patrick if they want to share it further. I don't know. This is the cover of my PhD thesis that is open source and downloadable, so you can check it out if you are interested. And all awesome projects, just like Shannon was showing, but these are all examples in Europe. So this one is the Groningen Gangbrooks Hall in Christiania in Copenhagen. And it's been operating since the 70s, really. And it has been focused initially for Christiania, but then it opened up in 2011 to the general population. And you have all deconstruction, demolition, or new construction sites that have leftover materials, like the ones you see there in the back that are basically new materials that didn't get to be used. This one is Återbruket Olelikan in Gothenburg, Sweden. And it's a recycling center or a reuse center at the recycling station. So when you drive to the recycling to throw the things out in your container, they ask you if there's anything that could be reused. And if you say yes, then they divert stuff for the construction and building in this sector, but they also have a secondhand shop for clothing and furniture and stuff. But they also have a workshop for repairing different elements. So that's very amazing, and it's been running by the municipality, and of course it generates money, and it's generating another pull. This is Rotor DC in Brussels, Belgium, and it is also a huge construction and demolition waste. Their focus is deconstruction and consulting. So they spend time doing the deconstruction. If a building is going to be demolished, they ask for a list of stuff. They go through, do a list of things like, okay, we'll take all this and we'll give you a report of the CO2 emissions that you're saving because we're taking it for reuse. So they do kind of the consulting in the environmental assessment of the impact that they do. And that is a service that they offer for the companies that do the demolition, because they're seeing that regulation is going to have to go in that direction, right?
And they're also creating products. They're offering their products. Either the raw materials via Instagram,
exactly.
But they're also combining and making lamps out of some products, or either beautiful things that are ready for reuse or materials, and the price depends on how much you're taking. And I think Rotor is an amazing.
Totally. And they've been doing this for several years, and they also do, as Peter says, Patrick says, these reuse, and they make products, and they have most of these also. I have the link. These have the link to the webpage, and they have links to their Instagrams accounts or so on. Återbruket Olelikan also has that. This is another one, like we've been talking about big scale, like municipalities or construction. And this one is also run by the municipality originally, or started by the municipality. It's the Fixoteket, which would translate into the like fixing library that the municipality tested in 4 different areas in Gothenburg. And it's basically a space, it's this space for reuse that Fasal was saying about, you know, like instead of putting it directly in the container, we have these shelves that we can put it, and so maybe neighbors can come and see if they want it before it's tossed, right? But this combines not only reuse of clothes and furniture and that sort of things, but it also it has small scale repair shops, and like you can lend tools, you can lend sewing machines, you can get the tools to fix your bike and to fix furniture as well. And it's run for the neighborhood by volunteer associations or by the housing companies. So they provide this space to do the community building in these areas. And it's gorgeous. The project from the municipality side ended. And of the 4 Fixotekets, 3 continued right where they were, and 1 got relocated to another area. But there's 4 Fixotekets in Gothenburg that are continuing on their own without have to be supported by the municipality. And then this is yet again another secondary material warehouse for construction. They also use, as Shannon was saying, things from film and TV, you know, like taking a lot of this materials that they've used for maybe a month and that's been tossed away, or also from big fairs and exhibitions, the Material Mafia in Berlin. And I worked, or I still work closely with Material Mafia in Berlin. And we did a project which was called the CURE project, or Centers for Urban Remanufacturing, we called it. And this is one of the results of that. It's an open source article. It's also downloadable, where we reviewed 15 of these initiatives that enable reuse and or remanufacturing by providing secondary materials and or access to tools. And very similar to what Shannon and Fasal have been saying, we combine, or we say that these things have secondary materials, but there's also a need to work with them. So we also need tools and open workshops. But there's a lot about capacity building and workforce development, but also how do we make a business out of this, and how do we make new products that are sellable and upscalable, right? That's kind of the vision long-term that we've thought about. And in parallel, the Urban Agenda for the EU, their group for circular economy, did a similar study that was on urban resource centers. And they also reviewed different initiatives. Some of them were overlapping with the ones that we reviewed, and some were different, but it's also downloadable here. And they got very similar results to what we were saying, like what are the barriers and facilitators and so on. And the last project, I swear, is this Haus der Materialisierung in Berlin that I've been involved with from the beginning. It's part of the renovation of the Haus der Statistik. It's the old statistics bureau of the DDR, right? Which is this building down here. And like behind these two, this is here, like behind these 2 buildings is this flat building, not high rise, where the Haus der Materialisierung is housed. And that is interesting because it's a collaboration between 24 different bottom-up organizations that were already working with reuse and remanufacturing in different places, and they've all come together to share one space and to get their voices heard. So they, like, pulling it together, they get much more information out, they can manage to reach more people and so on. And then they have more open hours and etc. So that's interesting. We have like a Berliner Staatsmuseum that's kind of like a Salvation Army sort of thing. They have furniture and clothes. The Material Mafia that I've been working with, Kunststoffe, is similar. They also sell secondhand. So all these are secondhand material shops. And then they have different organizations that actually use this. It's either a reuse, what do you call it, repair, the cafes and so on. And there's also workshops for textiles and wood, etc. I'll stop there. And I'm sorry if it's gone too long.
That's amazing. A very inspiring diversity of examples, and especially from a designer's point of view. And I know there's some other designers on the call, on the Zoom, that have been using materials, and so it's like, wow, suddenly this world opens up where you can have access to this material, and then maybe facilities to work on it and collaborate with others. I mean, it's incredible. Makai, can I ask you to point the camera to Arjen? I thought he might have an interesting comment before he has to run off. Comments or questions for our panel.
Oh, I would love if this was another hour long. Because I love all the examples that Shannon and Isabel have shared, sort of thinking more globally and looking at North America and Europe and what all the interesting things that are happening. I do have to run. I am meeting a student and some professors, and we're looking at how can we recycle or look at fabrics differently, fabric waste differently on campus. So one, in the identification process, so looking at how can we teach people to identify synthetics over natural materials, and then how is it either broken down and turned into new things or broken down to be now a new valuable material, so stuffing into costumes in the theater department and things like that. So just to give you a sense of some of the other things that we do at the Reuse Center, I do want to come back briefly with my very limited time to talk about demystifying reuse. Shannon, you brought it up a few times, and Isabel and Faisal as well. And I think it's important not only to demystify reuse for the visitors that come to all the reuse centers that we talked about today, but it's also about demystifying reuse for the people that work in our institutions. So we talk about the designers that come up with the new floor plans for the offices that are being renovated on campus, or new buildings that are being built, and thinking about how in the future, if you're building something new, how are we identifying like individual items like a door or a window, so that it gets taken apart, gets taken out, and we can reuse it again on campus for a different purpose. For instance, we recuperated over 200 chair tops. They never had legs. They were on swivel bases in a classroom, but now we have 200 plus chair tops that need legs. So it's a really interesting design challenge, not only for visitors that come to our center, but even here on campus for students like Patrick, as well as students in the undergraduate programs in our fine arts faculty. So there's so much potential in terms of what we can do, and it's just, again, demystifying, helping people through the stories that we tell about those materials. I have so many stories, and I could probably write a book at this point about all the stories behind the materials that we get into the center. And on a last note, we just decided this yesterday, but we are doing a used furniture, mostly furniture sale on the 4th and 5th of June here at our Grey Nuns building at 1200 Guy. So if you are looking for some used furniture, please come by. It'll be 10 to 4 on both of those days. And that's all I have for today. I'd love to stay, but I do need to go meet that student. So thank you all for chiming in.
Thank you, Arian, and I'll dovetail while you're walking out. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a workshop this afternoon with some high school students that are going to be stopping by Arian's Center for Creative Reuse at Concordia, and possibly picking up some of the materials to use in the workshop. So it's really a great living resource. I think any fine arts student who wants materials is first directed to go there. And so I think it's all of that, what Concordia is doing, although of course we can improve. I think education institutions really have a super important role to play in inspiring other organizations to move forward. Maybe we can go, if you guys have time, I don't know, Shannon and Isabel and Faisal, maybe there's a few more quick questions. Tell me if you have to leave. If there's any from the audience, please raise your hand or just pipe up, unmute yourself and pipe up. I certainly have some questions if others don't. One, just quickly, is Shannon, I wanted to understand how you're working with some of the industry players, be them either material donations or on a regular basis, or, for example, construction demolition waste. Is it also coming through your center? I know some of that is maybe really large. So just to get a sense of the Life Cycle Buildings Center's role in that regard.
Sure. We have a lot of different material streams, varying in scale. We work with a lot of general contractors, excuse me, as well as, smaller renovation contractors, remodelers. And then we're also working to, sort of think through strategically, say there's, companies that are providing certain types of materials and they have connections to opportunities where an older version of that item is coming out. So if that's cabinets, if that's appliances, if that's flooring, on and on and on, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Obviously, we also want to encourage people to also be using more salvaged materials. So that's a balancing act, but we're not going to get everybody to always only use new or only use reused materials. So, but yeah, we are, working with manufacturers. Interface is a great example. They collect, they invented carpet tile, now they collect carpet tile for manufacturing new products. And they collect more than they can use for manufacturing. So we repurpose a lot of that, and a lot of nonprofits and lower income homeowners are able to reuse it.
Okay, but like, do you get, I don't know, I-beams, like major things, or are those kind of things too large for your audience? Or?
Yeah, no, sometimes we have structural components. There's limitations. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about design with salvage materials and building codes. And, I will say that I showed that little farm shed, the Aluma farm shed with the vertical wood siding. That was actually one of the first projects that was designed that kind of like pushed the envelope with local building codes. And then the Candida building project took it much further. Because they're capturing all of their own, water for reuse in the building and things like that. So, so we're making strides, but there are other parts of the U.S. where using salvage materials for structural purposes is more the norm. It's not as much here, but that's kind of one of the next frontiers.
Great. We have a question from Thomas Henrik. Is that how I pronounce your name?
Heinrich, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, thank you to all three of you, and to Fourth Space for this great event. A point I'd like to touch on, and maybe hear possibly from the three of you, mostly, well, Shannon and Isabel, I feel like you've touched on this a bit more than Faisal. Through the different examples that you've shown, there have been cases where material reuse is presented more as like something that reintegrates a market. So there's been discussion about how does it enter the market in terms of like becoming a new product that is sellable at market value. And I know, for instance, that what distinguishes Concordia's Center for Creative Reuse and Shannon, what appears to be, if I understood correctly, the case of the life cycle building, those donations to nonprofits is something that goes a bit beyond or circumvents those sort of like market logics of like finding the market value of the material and then selling it at that value, and is instead donations or just like redistribution to the community. So I guess I would be interested in hearing your take, any three of you, on the importance and the role that that decision plays in material reuse and in, I guess, like the popularization of this practice.
I can touch on that just very briefly, Thomas. So what I would say is that, if reuse has a pretty significant PR problem. We've kind of touched on this a few times, right? We need a major marketing initiative. And I think part of achieving that is drawing attention. So data gathering and understanding the full power and spectrum of our industry collectively is key, right? Until we get to that point, what I have found is that the more that we can emphasize community benefit, the more investment and support we get. And it just warms our hearts, and it's a big motivator for us, on the staff to be able to support nonprofit organizations. And some of these nonprofits, I mean, it's tough, financially, it's really tough, and they're just barely hanging on. But it's also somewhat of a calculated move, because we are working to get more and more philanthropic institutions to give financially at larger scales. and they are already in the business of supporting charities. And so that was the sort of lightning bolt that helped them understand, oh, so all these nonprofits that are coming to me asking me for hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to do their, construction projects and renovation projects, if I get some of them to consider salvage materials, my dollars are going to go farther. So for me, that's been the key.
Thank you, Faisal, who has to take off. Very wonderful having you on board. Isabel, do you want to touch on Alex's question?
Exactly. I wanted to jump on that train. I totally agree with Shannon, and you bring up the question of value, right? And then how do we either show the value that we're creating for the communities to get more of these nonprofits or donations for nonprofits and charities, but it's also a little bit this. Do the materials have to be free? Like if we're setting up, like for example, the Fixoteca, all the materials there are for free. You can take stuff, but you can also bring stuff. So it's more of this swapping or sharing economy, right? But if you do, for example, if the Life Cycle Building Center wouldn't sell material secondhand, they wouldn't have the money to cover stuff. And I understand that they donate some of the material for the nonprofits, but other materials that they have to sell to cope up with the operations, right? So it's a very fine balance, and I think it's very, as Shannon says, it's really important to visualize the total value contribution, and also to make it more mainstream, to have it more in everybody's hand. And in that, this reuse organization, I shared the link in the chat, the first link, it's double R in the beginning. They are collecting information of all reuse initiatives, or pulling in all the information of all reuse initiatives in Europe. And they do reports that are like how much material has gone through, how many people have been employed, how many, et cetera, et cetera. So Shannon, if you're looking into this, definitely check them up and see how they've managed to do this kind of collective pooling to visualize a stronger unit. It's also like the HDM, all these different initiatives did things before, but being together, they become mass, right? It's like a critical mass thinking that needs to show this contribution that sometimes is in actually monetary value that we recover, and sometimes is not in the community value. That unfortunately is much more difficult to account for, right? But that does attract donations, as Shannon was saying.
If I can dovetail on that, and I invite the audience, if you have any last questions, to please raise your hand. But from a designer's perspective, I mean, the material, the possibility of obtaining free materials is only one component in the overall design process. And I think Philippe Charlebois-Gomez, who I see is on the call, would have some thoughts on this as well. But there is so many factors in coming up with a project for a reuse. One of which is the labor involved in transforming materials. So if I take a table that's been put on the street or available through a reuse center, and I want to use the wood, well, there's probably stripping the old finish, sanding it down, and this is even before cutting and so on. And so there could be many hours of labor involved in transforming a material. And so the fact that it's free is only one aspect, and in fact, maybe it's worth, from my perspective as a designer, paying something for a material that's closer to my needs in terms of my process. And certainly I've been using materials from a lighting manufacturer, but also sometimes combining them with some new materials just for process efficiency, to make the overall upcycled object that I'm creating something that's sustainable in the sense of viability from the designer standpoint. I don't know, Philippe, would you agree? I know your process is very different. You have a network of taking things off the street. So you have this network of friends that bring that kind of work for you in that sense. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm gonna go on what Shannon was saying, that I've established in the city of Montreal a community, and I've noticed how the participation level has gone up every year. The following, be it Instagram or simply people chiming in, knocking at my door saying, "Hey, I found your address. Here's a fan that I found. I know you collect them." And through thanking them through social media, other people pick up on that and have like sent me emails with photos of, "Hey, we're emptying out this entire floor at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Show up, and you'll have about an hour and a half with your team." And I don't have a team; I'm on my own. But I pretend like, yeah, we're coming. We'll have a truck. We'll have the boots and the gloves, and we'll dismantle everything. And it's me showing up and taking everything I can, bringing it back to my studio. I have real trouble with the notion that this material is free, or even that an organization would give it out for free, simply because I collect and transform my own material, so I can quantify the time it took to build that community, to then get notified that that material exists, to go get it, to figure out which one is really in shape that would be worth bringing back for my scale of production. I'm a solo artisan designer. And then at the workshop, it takes square footage. So we're paying every month, every week that I'm not using that material, it's being paid for. And then the cleaning, the transforming. And then after that, there's the whole marketing around the limited amount. So you're trying to showcase upcycling as something aesthetic, as something that the next generation will appreciate and use in their homes. But you can only do 10 of them, or you can only do 20, 30, sometimes just one. And that has a price. That has to have a price because you're working with a one-off. You can't create a system. It doesn't become an oiled machine. So there's that notion of free is very difficult for me. But yeah, the fact that the community is able to recognize that maybe they can't use that material and they'll bring it to a studio like mine, or others that are being created in the city of Montreal. One organization that I'd like to mention, I know I'm taking up a lot of time, sorry, but it's called La Mine Urbaine, the Urban Mine, and it's a nonprofit that's just starting. And essentially, I invited them to this call, but I think I was a bit last minute. They would be so happy to hear about everything that's being done in Atlanta and in the projects showcased in Europe, because that's the goal here in Montreal, to intercept material before it goes to a landfill. So thanks for thanks for that.
That's awesome. I just found the link, so I'm going to share it. Yeah, I think the whole idea of value, it just ties into everything we've been saying, including Faisal's data and machine learning and AI aspects, because it's tracking the value, and what gets tracked has the possibility of being the object of policy in terms of government and so on, and so resources being dedicated to it because we can see the impact in that regard. So I just wanted to end on that note, and thank you, Shannon and Isabelle and everyone who has joined us for taking part. It's been an amazing call. As people have mentioned, that we could do a whole other hour or two on these topics. I think it's amazing. So we'll put the links also in the YouTube version in the comments of the YouTube, or rather the description of the YouTube, if people want to go on Fourth Space and share what we've just, the contents of this roundtable with their friends, please do. And I invite you all to follow the activities of Shannon at the Life Cycle Building Center, and Isabelle through her research and links online. Isabelle, you've uploaded your PDF and put a link there, is that right?
I'll send it to you. I don't know where, or if not, I upload it somewhere. Just let me know where.
Okay, there's La Mine Urbaine, and I'm going to put the Life Cycle Building Center in Atlanta because it's really an inspiring organization in that sense. So yeah, please follow all this and keep the conversation on reuse going, because this is what we need to do, storytelling, as Shannon has mentioned. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I just want to remind you that, as Patrick said, the recording of this conversation is available on the Fourth Space Concordia YouTube channel. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
You take care.